Now that our store is all set up, we need to populate it with some initial data, in this case, our characters. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new directory, and inside that, we're going to add an actions.js file, which is where we're going to put all our actions that have to do with characters as a collection. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the API URL constant from our constants file, which we have not created yet, but we will. We're also going to export a constant called setCharacters, which will then be used by our reducer to make sure it reacts to the correct action. And then lastly, we're going to export an action that we are going to use to kick off and get all our characters and then get set in our store. So the function is going to be called getCharacters. It won't necessarily need to take in any data. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be returning a function from this. Now, why would we be returning a function? Well, remember what I said. If we return a function from an action, the Redux middleware will make sure that dispatch, the dispatch function, is passed into this function that we returned. This allows us to do asynchronous work and delay the dispatching of an actual action that our application will respond to until a network request comes back or something like that happens. So inside here, we want to make sure we fetch the data from the API. So we're going to use template tags, and we're going to get all the people. We're going to hit the API and get all the people. And since that returns a promise, we can start stringing a bunch of thens together. So first things first is we're going to get a response, and we want to turn that into JSON. Next thing we want to do is we want to pull the results out of that JSON. Well, the results are stored at the response dash results. So now we have the results. What do we want to do? Well, we want to take all those characters, because that's what the results are, and we want to dispatch another action. This action we're going to dispatch, we're going to call it setCharacters. So we need to make sure we're using dispatch. We're going to be using setCharacters, and we're going to pass it in the characters that we just received from the API. So you may be wondering, well, where is this setCharacters function? And that's a good call. Well, we still need to create it. So let's go ahead and create it. Okay, it's going to take in a bunch of characters, and all it's going to do is it's going to return an actual action object. So we need to return. We're going to give it a type, and the type is always going to be what our reducers are looking for. The reducers are always going to be looking for a specific action type. And this type is going to be equal to our setCharacters constant that we created earlier. And then we're also just going to pass in characters. Now, for those who don't know much about ES6, we can pass characters in like this, and this is equal to that. It just keeps things a little bit cleaner looking. So now that we have everything here, we have all our actions we need, let's start doing some cleanup. First things first, we need to create this API URL constant. So in the source directory, we want to create a constants.js, and I'm just going to paste this in here. But we're exporting a constant called API URL, and it's just equal to the base URL of the Star Wars API. So now that we have this constant created, we now need to create the reducer that will react to this action, this setCharacters action. And we're just going to put that in an index.js file right there inside the characters. First thing it's going to do is it's going to import our setCharacters constant. Next thing we need to do, and this isn't necessarily necessary, but it is good practice, is to set an initial state variable that defines what the initial state of this particular reducer is going to be. In this case, it's going to be an array, because we want our reducer initialized with an empty array. And then we need to make sure we export our reducer function. So the first thing it's going to receive is state, and we can give it a default value of initial state, and then it's going to be passed the action. Now, pretty much all reducers use a case statement, since you could have a lot of different actions that a reducer is listening for. So we're just going to set up a little switch statement here, and it's going to listen on the action type, and now we want to match on the action type. So if we see setCharacters, we know what we need to do. We need to pull out those characters out of the action and return them. So action, we want to return action.characters. Otherwise, our default value is just going to be return state. This is pretty much the format that every reducer you ever make will follow. You will import some stuff, you will have an initial state, and then you're going to export a function that takes in a state and the action. We're going to try to match on that action type, the action type, and any action that we want to actually do something on, we need to add it as a case statement. And then we need to make sure that we return how we want state to be changed. In this case, we want to take the characters out of the action and make sure those are put into our store. Otherwise, we don't care about it, and so we're just going to return whatever was already there. So now that we have this, we need to make sure that it's actually in our root state. So to do that, we need to come back to our reducer index.js file. We need to make sure that we import that reducer that we just created. And then we just want to put it right in here. But we know, okay, cool, the data is actually going to be able to be put into our root, but we have nothing kicking it off. We don't have an action creating anything. Well, we do. We know that when our application starts up, we want to go get that data. So back here in our app.js file, our main entrance file, we want to bring in that action we just created, the get characters action, and that's going to be inside reducer characters action. And we want to make sure that we use this get characters action. That's what we're going to use to kick it off. So here, after we create our store has the dispatch method on it, and we want to make sure that we use the action creator get characters to create an action, or in this case, it will simply kick off a AJAX request, which will then later, once it gets our characters, we'll send the characters in an action to the store again. It will hit this reducer. It'll say, oh, okay, cool, I see set characters. Yep, I see that action coming through. I want to make sure I pull the characters out and return those. That'll come through here. It'll get all combined together back through here, and we will have all our characters in our state. So let's see if we can get this working. First things first, let's go back and it looks like I have a mistake over here. Got a little crazy with the semicolons. Okay, and we want to restart that just to make sure everything comes up correctly. We still see our hello world. Well, why do we still see our hello world? Made yet another mistake. Over here, I'm using arrow functions. I need to actually use the arrow functions correctly. Let's restart that one more time. And now our hello world popped up. But we don't see any of our data, right? There's nothing being popped out. Well, that's because we haven't actually shown it. But if we pull up the DevTools and look in the Redux DevTools, we can see set characters was kicked off right at the beginning of our application booting up. Here's all the data that it got. That's the diff for this particular action. That was the difference. And here's our actual state. It can show us our state at any point in time. We can open this up and boom, there's all our data right there. Excellent. So now that we know that our data is in our store, we need to now figure out how to create a view that will pull that data out.